This episode references themes some listeners may find upsetting. Please check the podcast notes for more information and guidance on how to seek help and advice.
He was routinely working between 18 and 20 hours a day, normally 7 days a week. He normally had about between 2 to 5 hours of which he had the decision, did he feed himself, did he have a shower, or did he sleep?
None of the survivors that I've ever worked with have the exact same story because their exploiters will all use different techniques.
It was how he could get the most money out of an individual by making them work for so many hours. And that's when we saw them going into all of these different legitimate firms who needed temporary workers.
Whether it be careless or whether it would just be brazen or just naivety, but it happens. People get greedy and people get complacent, and it only takes one element of complacency for us to pick that up and we can follow it, and then following that we'll find more.
So our surveillance was on foot, was in motor vehicles, and also through technical deployments of equipment. And that would follow all the way through to where they were working, back again, and then to try and identify the different companies that they were working for on the late shifts, if you like.
I think the abuse that they suffered was just horrific. Having them tell you face to face is something that it doesn't leave you. And you just want the best for them, and you want them to be safe, and you want them to get justice.
This is the story of an investigation into a large-scale modern slavery ring that operated in Bristol for more than a decade. You'll hear how victims were put to work for 18 hours a day, how their bosses would use violence and financial control to keep them in line, and how the National Crime Agency used all its specialist skills to stop the cruel exploitation and put the perpetrators behind bars. I'm Richard Beanland, an officer with the National Crime Agency, and this is Underworld, behind the scenes of the NCA. This podcast series unearths the murky world of dangerous criminals and the incredible work undertaken by the National Crime Agency to bring them to justice. Episode 4, Hidden in Plain Sight.
Maros Tancos, I'm arresting you under suspicion of slavery, servitude and forced or compulsory labour, contrary to Section 1 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015.
Slovakian national Maros Tancos was arrested in July 2017. This was a pivotal moment in a National Crime Agency investigation targeting a substantial modern slavery operation that saw vulnerable people subjected to labour exploitation at a car wash in Bristol.
He came across as an arrogant man who believed he was untouchable, that was prepared to exploit really vulnerable people.
He was controlling, he was manipulative. He preyed on the weak and the vulnerable. And in the cases that we saw, the vulnerability was the poverty of people and the fact that they didn't have any family. And he preyed on that to get what he wanted.
The team would go on to uncover unimaginable cruelty, manipulation and abuse perpetrated by Tancos and his partner, Joanna Gomulska. At the time, the UK was in the European Union, so people were able to come and work here under the principle of free movement. Driven by greed, the couple lured young people to come to the United Kingdom, but once they arrived, the couple subjected them to appalling labour exploitation, all to line their own pockets. NCA officer Mark Morrison worked on the investigation, codenamed Operation Langsat.
There was a common theme that these people all came from an ex-children's home in Slovakia. But then by 18, when they became adults, they were obviously left the children's home, given an amount of money, and sent on their way to live life as an adult in a community. Clearly very vulnerable, but also very attractive to Maros Tancos's business, which was, I can get that person to come to the UK and work for me, promise them the earth, which is clearly what he did. And so what he would do is that he would approach men in the main, but also women. He would offer them work, a certain amount of money. He would pay for their airfares and their travel to get to the UK. And then he would meet them invariably at Bristol or Luton. He would put them to work at his car wash, Mario's car wash in Bristol. And they would work a day shift And then from there, it was how he could get the most money out of an individual by making them work for so many hours. And that's when we saw them going into all of these different legitimate firms who needed temporary workers.
When I first stepped into that house, it was quite nice, but I wasn't aware of what would happen next. This house became a gate to hell. I discovered that life was not how I thought it would be. I wasn't allowed to leave the house, and the only thing I knew was work. All the time I was thinking that I was a slave there. I thought there was no way back.
Those were the words of one of Tancos' victims, read by an actor and taken from an impact statement that details his ordeal. Throughout this episode, you'll hear more accounts by those who were mistreated by Tancos and Gomulska during their campaign of exploitation in Bristol. Proving offences as complex as modern slavery would require all the specialist skills of the NCA, including expert witness care, financial investigation, and international collaboration. But what exactly is modern slavery, and how does it impact those who are exploited by these kinds of criminal enterprises? Here's Lauren Saunders from Bristol-based charity Unseen.
Modern slavery is a crime that encompasses many things. It's at its foremost a human rights violation, but it's also an economic crime. It can include human trafficking, which is being moved from one place to another against someone's will with a purpose to exploit that individual for someone else's gain. That gain could be something like financial gain, sexual gratification gain, or for services. In the case of domestic servitude, someone might live in someone's home and cook and clean for them. None of the survivors that I've ever worked with have the exact same story because their exploiters will all use different techniques, but many are exposed to physical violence. Some may experience sexual violence, some may have finance removed. We've seen cases of forced surrogacy and forced pregnancy. We've seen cases of organ removal and county lines where individuals are forced to move drugs from one area of the country to a different area of the country. We do see a change in patterns and trends of exploitation. So we went through a period where we had lots of UK nationals who experienced that county lines abuses. We've also seen different patterns and trends in exploitation in other forms. We've seen individuals forced to commit crimes and therefore they could have a criminal history against their will because they were forced into it. Real high levels of emotional abuse that has deep trauma impacts on the individual that can take years to recover from.
I liken it to this. So I can sell a human being or make a human being do things more than once. So once I've sold a kilo of cocaine, that's it, gone. I can't sell it again. Whereas if I can get a human being to do something for me without having to pay them, or I get some reward, then I keep getting that reward. Once I finish with that person, I can potentially sell them to another gang that does the same thing. We certainly found in our case, some of our victims were beaten. We found them getting injuries from being made to work in dangerous conditions. So people might not see it, but in a car wash, you're dealing with chemicals and the likes, and we were encountering people with burns and various skin diseases. Certainly two of our victims that we spoke to both gave accounts of how they ended up in hospital, one with a broken elbow as a result of an injury, and then made go back to work the next day.
It is extremely common in the UK, and it's often a hidden crime, so many people don't realise how prevalent it actually is. In 2024, there was over 19,000 people who were identified as potential victims of modern slavery and referred to the government's national referral mechanism. And those people that contact our helpline are, again, only people who know that the helpline exists. So it is a very, very hard scaling project to do because it is such a hidden crime.
Of those 19,000 people referred to the government's national referral mechanism, the framework used to identify potential victims of modern slavery, the most common nationality were people from the UK, with the majority of those referrals being young boys who'd been exploited by county lines drugs gangs. When it came to Operation Langsat, it was clear Tancos targeted vulnerable people in Slovakia, maintaining control by promising prosperity and ensuring his victims felt too scared to escape.
They came from living conditions which were really, really poor. They were in properties that had no central heating, no windows, no running water. They had to go to a standpipe in the street. They are then promised something which is better. And you can kind of understand that living in a house with 10 people in rooms, which has at least got electric and heating and a bed in it, is better than what we've been. And I went to Slovakia, I saw the conditions they were living in. But I know you and me would never live like that. The control is done through telling them that they're in danger of being arrested, even though they weren't, because back then we were all part of the EU. We were able to travel and work quite legitimately in each other's countries. But of course they were told a lie, and so they always had the fear of being arrested. They couldn't escape because they never had their passports or their ID cards. They were secured away. And then they got the language problems. None of these guys spoke English, and they find themselves on the street. How do they ask for help? So when you've got all of that together, they then become acclimatized to that type. So some of these guys were living there for years and years. You know, they were encountered by police previously and still wouldn't complain. And so it's that psychological hold with all the other bits and the promise, I'll send you some money tomorrow. So all of that control was done through a system and over a period of time.
It's very difficult to explain how I felt when I was not getting paid. We came from a children's home, and from there we went back to my mother, but she had nothing for us. When we went to the UK, we didn't think about whether we had money or not. We were just happy to be away from the camp and to have a clean house. Maros knew that. Maros abused that. That is why he chose us.
To understand exactly how this case got on the radar here at the National Crime Agency, we have to go back to 2017 and visit Slovakia, where local law enforcement had received reports from a victim who'd managed to return home and who claimed they'd been exploited while in the UK. Here's Maros Tancos, a member of Slovakia's illegal migration unit who worked on the investigation.
I was then appointed with this case by the National Unit Combating Illegal Migration East, and this person was then interviewed, and based on this interview and further investigation, a criminal prosecution was started. Considering the fact that the offence took place in Great Britain, I sent a request via Europol to the UK to investigate victims' interview, and also we found out other information regarding this offence and the suspect. Subsequently, based on my request to the Great Britain, there was a meeting organized between the NCA and police of the Slovak Republic in Europol, sometimes in March 2017. During this meeting, our parties exchanged information about the case and about the individuals that were suspected and other victims of human trafficking. The joint investigation team in Langstad was then formed.
So we knew from the allegation that the main man, if you like, was Maros Tancos, a Slovak national, lived in a house which was rented in the name of his father. He didn't have a criminal footprint in the UK. So it was about then looking at who his associates were. And that's when we got the name Joanna Gomulska, which was the partner. We observed she was resident with him at Brentry Lane in Bristol. And again, we saw her. There was no previous criminal footprint for her.
After learning about the allegations against Tancos from our Slovakian counterparts, we decided to put covert surveillance in place, which would help build a detailed picture of his operation.
So our surveillance was on foot, was in motor vehicles, and also through technical deployments of equipment. And that would follow all the way through to where they were working, back again, and then to try and identify the different companies that they were working for on the late shifts, if you like. And then we also quickly identified a pattern where we could see different people being put into people carrier type vehicles and taken from the house to a car wash. The evidence we got was crucial for the initial stages where we go, right, okay, we know that these people are moving multiple victims. We know that They are taking them. So if you think about what trafficking offence looks like, it's moving them from one place to another. And people don't understand that a trafficking offence doesn't have to be across borders. It can be from one house in the street to the next street. So that gave us the evidence they were being moved. So we were okay with that. But it also showed who was doing it. And it was always Tancos or Gomulska.
The covert surveillance allowed the Langsat team to establish a vital understanding of how Tancos and Gomulska operated. They were based in a house in Brentry Lane, where the workers were often locked in and forced to live in abysmal conditions. But a delicate balance had to be struck between gathering evidence and moving in to safeguard the people they were abusing.
You know, we're seeing human beings basically exploited. But if you go too soon, you miss out on the fact that there may be a lot more victims that you don't know about or elsewhere. So we have to get it so that we can get into a position, go, right, we're now satisfied we know how many's there. We've seen on our surveillance, as I stated, people being put into cars and vehicles and taken to car washes where we've seen them working. We've not seen any violence on any of our surveillance, which is clearly good news. How much longer do we get this to go before we have to say, right, enough's enough? We wanted to try and improve our ability to get a charging decision and to rescue all these people.
Maros Tancos, I'm arresting you under suspicion of arranging and facilitating human trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation, contrary to sections 2 and 3 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
As part of the search team, we arrived and we found in Brentry Lane both Gomulska and Tancos, and they had with them 5 adult Slovakian males in the house. They were taken away, they were treated like human beings, probably for the first time in many, many years.
Alongside the investigation team, we deployed our expert witness care officers, a team who are specially trained to interview victims of crime. One of those witness care officers was Rebecca, an NCA investigator with 29 years' experience in law enforcement and more than 18 years as a specialist interviewer.
Immediately after the arrest and the premises had been secured, we were asked to go in and speak to our appointed witnesses. We were also buddied up with interpreters so we could speak to them. There was 5 sets of specialist witness interviewers that were allocated so that each victim could have their own right from the very, very beginning. The whole purpose was to speak to them, to try and get them to come to what we class as reception centres so that we can speak to them, we can make sure that we can take full accounts from them, we can make sure that any medical needs are dealt with and they're in a place of safety so that they can, if they want to speak to us, have the opportunity of giving their best evidence.
It was quite obvious to me that the house was divided into the haves and the have-nots. Tancos and Gomulska had the nicest bedroom. They had a living room which turned out to be out of bounds to any of our victims, which had all the mod cons in it, all the electronics, nice furniture, just looked nice. 2 fridges, one full of food, one hardly anything in it. The one full of food was our offenders, the other one was our victims. But then we went upstairs to the bedrooms. Mattresses on one set was so badly worn and that the people using them had lined the beds with cardboard to try and give some comfort, if you like, from the springs. Clothing was minimal. We found in a set of drawers some socks. When we opened the socks, coppers had been hidden inside it. It was clear that the person was trying to raise a bit of money, and they were disgusting, absolutely filthy. We then went up into the attic where there were multiple mattresses just lying on the floor. So it was clear Gomulska and Tancos lived in the best side of it, whereas all the others lived in dirty, dark, horrible rooms. Unfortunately, it was what I expected upstairs. Little things like finding the money hidden in socks, and they were all 2p's, pennies and 5p's. Not great. So I'm really glad we went in, and that's what our job is to do, to get those people out of what is really, really poor conditions.
Tancos knew I was brought up in a children's home and had no family. I thought he would be different and try to help people raised by the children's home, but I was let down. Every day, he accused me of the same things and was calling me names. I remember how he shouted at me. It's hard to accept what happened. I was stressed in that house every day. The way I was humiliated for every little thing. I was hit and punished. I will never forget that.
We knew that Avon and Somerset police had visited the home the year before, but none of those trapped had dared to speak out about the abuse they were suffering. This is common for victims of modern slavery. The years of lies and manipulation by Tancos meant that convincing the victims to share their accounts and support a prosecution would prove challenging for our NCA team.
Tancos and Gomulska were arrested by Avon Somerset Police in 2016. And on that occasion, a number of individuals were located at the address, but wouldn't make a complaint, didn't think they were victims in general. And as much as the police tried to get them to explain the full facts, they weren't prepared to support any prosecution. So quite rightly, Avon Somerset closed that down, and 2 of them were released without any charge. When we went in 2017, considering they'd already been arrested, the fact that they hadn't changed their style of living, offending at all, showed that they were extremely confident that the people that they were manipulating were either too frightened or scared to actually ever come across and tell. In fact, it's quite telling that because we took a translator with us and he was overheard in Slovakia saying somebody must have talked.
The biggest thing that we've learned is you speak to them directly. We had obviously an interpreter, and we've subsequently identified that the interpreter is very important because on a previous occasion where law enforcement had been to the house, they'd taken, although there was a Slovakian speaker, they were from the Czech Republic. A Romani Slovakian does not trust someone from the Czech Republic. So it gave them a lack of trust, whereas we'd taken an actual Slovak speaker, and she was from Slovakia, out with us, and that immediately got their trust. I think for us, it made life a lot easier because they'd seen Tancos been arrested and taken out the home. That helped them see that this was being taken very, very seriously. They could see that we were speaking to all of them. It's quite a bit of pressure to realise that one wrong word that you say could stop somebody engaging with you. We just kept sitting him down. We kept saying it was his decision. We were here to help them. We were here to find out what had happened and would they come with us. And he said yes.
Through careful interviews with the victims, our witness care officers were able to gather significant details about the abuse Tancos and Gomulska used to control their workers and secure evidence about the impact this had on them. Rebecca was paired up with one of the victims who'd been exploited by Tancos for 13 years.
He was routinely working between 18 and 20 hours a day, normally 7 days a week. Right from the very beginning, he would work in car washes during the day, and then they would go to work on an evening for legitimate companies, but through employment agencies. So after doing a full day in the car wash, cleaning the cars, they would then be transported to work as cleaners, dealing with like parcels, putting them in the right lorries. They would do deliveries, so they would be sorting all individual deliveries out and working in the warehouse kind of it as cleaners or sorting out the post, etc. So we'd be leaving about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, traffic dependent, to get to the car wash for that to open at about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. That would close between 6 and 8. He would then go and do 6 hours night shift, sometimes not finish until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He would then be picked back up again, taken back, and as he said, he normally had about between 2 to 5 hours at the end of his night shift before the day shift started, of which he had the decision: did he feed himself, did he have a shower, or did he sleep?
I honestly cannot describe what I experienced over there. I did not realise that I had lost all my freedom. What he was doing with us, it was catastrophic. I would not wish for even a dog to experience what we had to go through. I got hit by a car at the car wash. He refused to let me have any medical attention, so I still have a problem with my kidney. I also had health complications, and the hospital did not know what was wrong with me. In the end, they found out. I had mentally hit rock bottom.
It had very, very long-lasting impact on his physical and his mental health, obviously. Physically, he was barely eating. Even in the months following when he'd been rescued, he still struggled to eat like a normal amount of food. He couldn't eat a full sandwich, and he never certainly liked to eat in front of people. He felt quite embarrassed about how little he could eat. Through the series of interviews, he started disclosing more and more to us parts of physical violence. So mental abuse, it was mental abuse because he wasn't allowed to contact his family. It was his nephew was seriously ill. He only wanted to make a phone call and he wasn't allowed. And then that's when he started describing he tried to commit suicide.
As well as securing victim accounts, the team recovered mountains of physical evidence from the house, including bank cards, mobile phones, and other records that would shed more light on how Tancos and Gomulska ran their operation. It soon became clear that the pair would escort victims to local banks, posing as their friend or translator, and set up UK bank accounts in their names. These details would then be shared with the employment agencies where the victims were working so their wages could be paid. But Tancos and Gomulska would keep the card and PIN number for each account and use the funds as their own.
We were able to get into phones belonging to both individuals. There was a wealth of evidence on their devices which indicated the banking details. Tancos, for example, had everybody's PIN number saved on his phone so that when they went in, and we eventually got the CCTV from the banks, which showed them using the cash points, you can see them going through the phones to make sure they got the right PIN number. So the phones had all those in it. It had the evidence of the flights on there. Basically everything we needed was on those devices. So it wasn't just their word against these two. It was confirmed evidentially. They'd be taken to banks, they'd open bank accounts. Tancos and Gomulska were always the person that was there as their interpreter. We found at Brentry Lane most of the bank cards that linked to these victims. So whilst they went in and they were opened in their names, they never had control ever. In fact, they never saw what was in there. When we run a job like this, which is clearly financially driven, we need somebody that knows what they're looking at. So we had a financial investigator. Her role was to review all the financial evidence we got. So as a team, we got for her all the bank accounts. We got all the pay records coming from the different companies. We got all the movements of money that we could see. We could also see, for example, that they were paying for mobile phones. We could see that they were buying cars. We could see that they were taxing all their vehicles. So all of this all became this one big pot of information that went in, that it then became Stacey's job to tell us exactly what that meant.
I was brought in then to predominantly go through the financial records of victims and the subjects and scrutinise and analyse those accounts, because they were stating in their statements that they didn't have access to their bank accounts. My role then as a financial investigator was to make sure that I went through all the evidence, making sure we'd obtained all the bank accounts that were either known or not known for the victims, and then the same for the subjects, and then overlaying that data and looking then to see how I could link our subjects to the use of those victims' bank accounts and corroborating what the victims were saying, really. I could see quite early on that the main subject, Tancos, his personal details were throughout the account openings. It was his mobile, or it was his email, or he'd be sat in the meetings with the banks as part of the account opening. And as part of my process then, it was looking through those bank accounts for any transactions or lines of inquiry I could attribute to the subjects. For example, any CCTV that they'd already obtained, I could do the continuity backwards to put debit cards of the victims to those CCTV opportunities, whether they were cash withdrawals at ATMs or whether they were use of debit cards in casinos, because intelligence at that time had identified that they had an interest in attending casinos. And then due to the date and time of the CCTV, I could then correlate that with transactions on the victim's bank accounts. There was benefit payments going in to bank accounts from other victims. There was loan repayments going into their accounts from loans that Tancos had taken out with other third parties. I could see transactions on their bank accounts that were linked to leisure activities for him. I think there was one transaction to a swimming club in his name. The account for that payment was his. There was a fishing club he was a member of. That payment came from a victim's bank accounts. Purchases of vehicles and other elements of his day-to-day life were being funded from those victims' bank accounts.
So what the financial information did show was they lived a lifestyle that was totally different from our victims. They had food, they had drink, they drove cars. All of the things they had was off the back of all the work that our victims had done. So when you saw all of that going on, you could see the relevance of our financial work, because what it did is it supported and corroborated all the information that we could get from our surveillance, from what people were saying. So it was really crucial that we could also show to a jury, this is why they've done it, because there was no other motive other than the money.
Nothing is in the too hard to do box for us. If there isn't a way of finding out to doing it, we will find a way to do it. And our reach is really extensive. It unravelled for him where I could put him to using these victims' bank accounts and corroborating what the victims were saying, which gave them that position of strength and trust and confidence then to come through the court system and then, work with the prosecution against him. Whether it be careless or whether it would just be brazen or just naivety, but it happens. People get greedy and people get complacent, and it only takes one element of complacency for us to pick that up, and we can follow it, and then following that we'll find more.
When I first went to the UK, I was told it would be nice because we will receive wages every month. He kept saying we would get our wages, but we were waiting and never received them. All the time we were working. I had no more strength to go to work anymore, so I said, enough. I can't explain it. It was so hard. I was having 3 hours sleep and going back to work.
Through examination of all the bank accounts, the team found that Tancos and Gomulska had transferred almost £300,000 out of their victims' accounts, all money they'd earned through secondary agency jobs. It was also established that they failed to pay them more than £900,000 in wages, calculated on the basis that victims would have been paid minimum wage for 8 hours a day. In the meantime, the witness care team had interviewed 42 people and 29 victims had agreed to give evidence at court. They described how Tancos would bully his victims using violence and intimidation, while Gomulska was more subtle, controlling them with the hold they had over their finances.
He made no comment throughout interview. He thought he was invincible, whereas she seemed a lot more shocked. She said she was their friend. So he basically said, no, I'm here to look out for them. I get them cigarettes. She accepted, she took them to work, but she was only there helping. She believed that she was helping. And that was actually her case throughout the court. When she went through trial, she continued to say that. We'd recovered property, which showed her taking notes of how much money she was taking off them. So she wasn't helping them at all. She was helping herself. And when we asked why she was withdrawing their money from their accounts when she's out in a casino with Tancos, it was just, that's what we did. It was for him. She also tried to paint herself a little bit under his control. When you consider their roles, he was clearly the person that had the access to the people. They were in a relationship, and he played the role where he used a bit of fear and violence as a way he controlled them, whereas she came across as being, I'm your friend, I'm helping you out, but clearly making just as much money as he did. So it was like the bad cop and the good cop his way. They kind of played those roles, one iron fist and the other one nicely.
Thousands of people are victims of modern slavery in the UK, and it often occurs in plain sight, like in this case at a car wash, but also nail bars, construction sites, restaurants and takeaways. Offenders prey on vulnerable people in our society who desire a better life. The NCA coordinates the law enforcement response and focuses on dismantling the criminals that direct, enable or profit from modern slavery. It is vital the public know how to spot the signs and trust their instincts. Are the prices unusually low? Do workers appear controlled or intimidated? Do workers lack protective equipment or appear to be lacking in skills? Here's Lauren from Unseen with more.
With modern slavery, it's about looking for what you're seeing and then looking a little bit deeper. So, for example, if someone is not wearing appropriate PPE, protective equipment, when they're working on, say, a construction site, that could be an indication that that organisation isn't working in the most safe way. Looking deeper than that, there could be exploitation, because if someone's willing to cut corners in one regard, they could be willing to cut corners elsewhere. If someone's appearing fearful, and if they're like looking over their shoulder or constantly checking to see who's around them, that could be an indication that, again, they feel like they're being monitored. So it's really looking at what makes someone vulnerable, what are you seeing, and asking more detailed questions to unpick what's under the surface. If you feel someone is at immediate harm, it's always worthwhile to call emergency services. If there is less of an emergency concern, there's always 101, but we also run the Modern Slavery Helpline, which is available on a daily basis and can advise on signs to look out for. So if you're seeing something and you're like, oh, I'm not quite sure if this is modern slavery, then picking up the phone or visiting our website. And there's lots of information within both places where you can really kind of understand what you're seeing and what might be under the surface.
So we arrested him originally, and at that point there was insufficient evidence to charge, because clearly we had a mountain of evidence that we'd seized from these searches of these houses that we had to go through. So they were given conditional bail, and then we saw them some months later. Once everything was done, they got rearrested, and then we finally got a charging decision. There was clear challenges for the lawyer allocated to our job due to the volume of victims that we had, trying to work out how many, if there were charges to be had, how many we would then do. So it took a while, but then the CPS clearly came back with yes, there is sufficient evidence. I want you to charge the two of them with these offences, and they then appeared before the court.
In 2019, Tancos and Gomulska were charged with a string of modern slavery offences, including conspiracy to require another person to perform forced or compulsory labour. The prosecution would rely on powerful testimony from victims, many of whom had returned to Slovakia. So while preparation was underway for the trial, the NCA sent witness care officers over to them to ensure they felt supported and able to give their best evidence when the time came.
Victims came from Roma communities. These were the individuals who lived in difficult social conditions. Most of them were in receipt of only just social benefits, or the victims that came from children's homes that after reaching 18 years of age, they left children's homes, and they found it more difficult to be part of a real life. In case of victims, there was a member of a joint investigation team from Great Britain who was in charge of this. They were provided with protection, whilst Ministry of Interior of the Slovak Republic have certain contracts with charity organizations that help these victims in securing accommodation and also integration into a proper life.
So at one point, I think I was trying to look after 30 witnesses in Slovakia. They lived in a number of different settlements. The majority of them came from one settlement just on the outskirts of Kasishi. For those that did have family, even if they moved away, we could still keep some form of contact with them through their family members. And so the Slovakian police, they were absolutely brilliant. They would routinely go out and make sure that everybody was where they were, that I had as much current telephone numbers as I could. And we tried to contact them at least monthly to show that we were still interested. They knew we were taking it seriously. Then COVID hit. Incredibly poverty-stricken communities, what they came from. As a result, infections, diseases were rife. With them not also agreeing to COVID vaccinations, this then meant that in the height of COVID, there were no-go areas for Slovakian police officers. Luckily, because of everything that they'd actually been through. We were just really relieved that they still wanted to engage with the whole process.
The pandemic created logistical challenges in Slovakia, but also meant there were delays in the UK as the trial got pushed back due to COVID restrictions. But finally, in January 2022, the prosecution opened and Tancos and Gomulska were in the dock. Rebecca was joined by fellow witness care officer Lily in Slovakia to support the victims throughout the process.
I think we arrived on the Friday or the Saturday and the trial was set to start on the Monday. It was meant to be initially us out there for 3 weeks, but in the end we did 3 trips out there.
I think when we got to trial, there were some clear barriers that came in because of the language barrier, the fact that these guys were in Slovakia, COVID was going on. So yeah, there were delays. You question yourself throughout, is there anything you've missed? Have you done your best job to get it all there? And then you're in the hands of a jury system.
In the end, 15 of the victims gave evidence at trial, including the man who'd been exploited by the couple for 13 years and attempted to take his own life.
He was giving evidence for about a week. It certainly felt longer. He was cross-examined over, I believe, about 3-4 day period. He'd been shown images of himself where he was part naked that he never knew had been taken, and at one point he didn't want to carry on. We just told him look how far he'd come, look what he did, for him not to give up because of one image. However distressed it made him, go back in there and tell them you are distressed. Don't let it derail you giving evidence and your opportunity to tell Tancos what he's done. And it worked, and he went back in and he was the first witness up as well, so it was very important, one, that we did keep him there, and 2, he did have the most to say.
To be honest, I think hearing all of them, it's something that I don't think will ever leave me, especially some of the ones that were there longer. I think the abuse that they suffered was just horrific, and especially, it's one thing sort of reading about it or hearing it in the news, but having them tell you face to face is something that just it doesn't leave you, and you just want the best for them, and you want them to be safe, and you want them to get justice. One walked in with such confidence, it was just amazing. He had such confidence and such a drive to get this justice, and to tell everyone what had happened to him. I think he will stick with me as well, just seeing that passion, and whilst all of them wanted this justice, he just had a different way of showing it.
The financial information, the information we got off phones around ID cards and CCTV and the surveillance, I think we would still have gone to the Crown Prosecution Service and asked for a charging decision. Whether we would have got a charging decision is another thing. These men, there were a couple of ladies, but these men gave very, very powerful testimony and stood up to some quite strong cross-examination where they were accused of making things up and lying. And I think that's, again, testimony to the support that they were given. We don't tell them what to say. It's down to them to tell us the story, but it's about them showing that they're being supported.
After 3 months, the jury went out to deliberate and found Tancos and Gomulska guilty of 19 offences between them. In June 2022, Gomulska was jailed for 9 years. Tancos was jailed for 16.
I would rank the result as the top one I've had. And I've been to Crown Court many, many times in my service. But the fact that we showed so many people that they were believed was the most important thing. Don't get me wrong, the sentence reflected the seriousness of the job. But from a personal point of view, to be able to do that and to see the thanks from all the people and to get the letters was my best moment.
It just gives you the satisfaction that you're doing your job right, and we are presenting evidence, and the evidence is deemed effective and successful in what we're presenting. So it shows that the lines of inquiry we followed were the right ones to follow at that time.
It was certainly rewarding that the joint investigation team had its purpose, and that together with the NCA we managed to complete the investigation to a phase that the court actually admitted our secured evidence. The perpetrators were convicted, and mainly that we were able to help the victims in this case.
Through COVID, none of them thought they would ever see this day. It was very emotional through the whole period, but you quickly forget every bad thing and every upset and everything once, you hear that the jury have found them guilty. Everything else just pales into insignificance. And it's one of the most rewarding things of my career that these people, after 5 years of telling them, we will get to this point, that finally it did happen.
I went to the court while they were sentenced, and I just remember sitting there getting goosebumps as I listened to it. Obviously, you're there in a professional capacity, but the moment I stepped out of that courtroom, I was incredibly emotional for everything that the victims had done for themselves through that process, and they finally got that day. It was an acknowledgement of what happened to them was wrong. It should never have happened.
One of the victims said right at the very end on his victim impact statement, "I'd like to thank you because you've made me live my life again." And I think that pretty much sums up what we've done. So they've all got their lives back. And when they haven't got any money and they were still prepared to send a card through the post to one of my witness officers, for me, that speaks volumes.
I'm happy I got out of there. I'm very lucky because I met people that got me out of that house, and I've started to enjoy my life. Nobody tells me that I'm not allowed to keep things that I was not allowed to keep in Maros's house. It's a miracle that I got out of there. Without those people who rescued me, I would still be there, and nobody would ever know.
Now I feel better. I'm free. It's 100 times better to be a free person, because if you are free, you have everything. I can eat normal food. I'm allowed to have a mobile phone with me. I can buy new clothes, and they're mine. Now if I am working for myself. I was suffering over there, but I am not suffering anymore. I am a free man.
I'm Richard Beanland, and you've been listening to Underworld, behind the scenes of the NCA. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with our podcast. You can also find bonus content from the National Crime Agency on our social media channels.